welcome to our webinar today on community grievance mechanisms in the oil and gas industry. We currently have 58 people on the line so far, so it's great to see the level of interest in this topic. The purpose of today's webinar is to better understand the key drivers for community grievance mechanisms and explain how the Ipieca manual can be used to assist in design and implementation. We have a number of speakers who will be helping us deliver our agenda. Firstly, Elizabeth Wild, Social Responsibility Director in BP's Safety and Operational Risk Function, who will be introducing Ipieca's Business and Human Rights Project. Then Susan Willow and Luke Vandervleet will be providing an overview of the development of the Ipieca manual and providing an in-depth look at its content. Susan and Luke are the consultants who facilitated the development of the Ipieca manual for community grievance mechanisms and supported the pilot project sponsored by member companies to field test approaches to CGMs in different operating contexts and geographies. We'll also be hearing from Daniel Ogle, who's the Grievance Officer for Tullow Oil in Kenya, who'll be providing perspectives from the field. And finally, Gabriella Herzog, Senior Manager of Corporate Social Responsibility at Hess Corporation and Chair of Ipieca's Social Responsibility Working Group, who'll be talking briefly about corporate implementation of the manual, as well as outlining the lessons learned during the development process. We know we have some people on the call with practical experience, and we'd love to hear your comments on the realities of managing community complaints during the Q&A discussion after the presentation, especially your thoughts on the lessons learned piece that will be our final slide. So before we begin our agenda, I'll quickly run through some technical logistics. Everyone is currently on mute, apart from our speakers, and during the Q&A session, you can either raise your hand via the WebEx system to indicate you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, after which I will unmute you, or you can type the question into the dialog box. I can see people already using the dialog box, so that's great. You can either send a question to all participants using the dialog box, or just send it to myself, and I can read these out during the Q&A. So before I hand over to our presenters, I'm going to very briefly introduce Ipieca. So Ipieca is the Global Oil and Gas Industry Association for Environmental and Social Issues. We were established in 1974 at the request of the UN Environment Programme, and we remain the industry's key interface with the UN today. We've currently got 36 member companies, comprising all 6 super majors and 7 national oil companies, as well as 16 associations, forming a network of over 400 oil and gas companies. We currently have 9 working groups focusing on issues under our 3 themes, which are energy and climate, environment and social. The working groups are comprised of experts from our membership who work together to develop good practice guidance and share expertise through peer learning through our meetings, workshops and other engagements. The manual we're discussing today was developed by our Human Rights Task Force as part of our Social Responsibility Working Group. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth Wild of BP, who is one of our longest-standing working group members.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Helen. It's Elizabeth here, and it's great to have lots of people join this call. So on this slide, I think it's number 3, or I can't read the number very well, 3 or 5, just to give a really quick summary of what Ipieca has been doing in the business and human rights field for several years now in order to really try and help the industry to fully understand the UN Guiding Principles expectations and to give everybody some, some really good guidance on how to go about the different processes we believe are involved. So the first on the corporate responsibility to respect. We've done quite a bit of work on what's called, due diligence within the UN Guiding Principles sort of language, and this is really around, how do you decide which potential human rights impacts are material for those that might be impacted, and how do you decide which human rights and which potential impacts to prioritize. So we have some guidance on that, which is available publicly. And we've also done quite a bit of work on how do you integrate human rights into environmental and social and health impact assessments. because on the whole, we believe that it's a good idea to try and do that in an integrated way so that human rights isn't isn't an optional extra, but really is woven into the whole impact assessment. The other area that we've done quite a lot of work on is the subject of today's call, so I won't say too much about that. The whole community grievance mechanisms field, and you'll hear about the pilot projects that we've done, which have then helped to lead to the various guidance and tools that we've produced over the last couple of years. And then the last sort of big piece is a human rights training tool. We've had one of these, or packs of slides on this, to help companies with internal training. We've had this for some time. And we've updated it from time to time. So, for example, now there's a dedicated module on labour issues, and we are, I think, as an industry, we've come to think a lot more about the supply chain, because so much of what we do is done for us by suppliers and contractors. So we know we really need to think about that area. So I think that's all I'll say for the moment, just to summarise the work that Ipieca has been doing over the last few years. And I think I'm now handing over to Susan Wildow, who's going to talk about the pilot projects that led up to the guidance. Susan?
Thanks very much, Elizabeth and Helen and everybody that's out there. I think that when Luke and I started this project with Ipieca, we never imagined that in 2015 we would be part of this great webinar. So a couple of points really stand out in my mind as I think about how the manual was developed. And as Elizabeth alluded to, the first one, it has to do with these pilot projects. When Luke and I first learned about the opportunity to be part of the Ipieca Grievance Mechanism project, we thought, wow, this is just a terrific opportunity and such an exciting project. And our second reaction was, what have we learned from our experience doing this kind of work in the past that we can bring forward and apply here? And the key thing that we both agreed to right away and hoped our committee would support was the idea of getting out into the field, because we felt that the real answers to creating an authoritative guidance that would be practical and useful lay in the field and in getting out there, rather than sitting in Colorado or Canada writing this manual just out of our heads with a little bit of consultation here and there. So happily, that idea was immediately picked up by our committee, and they were very persistent and gritty and great recruiters in finding 7 participating companies from a very diverse range of sites across 3 continents that included offshore, onshore assets, conventional and unconventional resources, both indigenous and non-indigenous populations, and in developing and developed countries. So we had a terrific variety in the pilots. The aim of the pilots was to support the development or the improvement of a community grievance mechanism, and to draw upon those experiences from the pilots to really inform the grievance mechanism guide. So I think those pilots were just at the heart of this work. In addition to that, I think the second factor that really influenced the development of the manual was setting up what we call a collaborative learning partnership that was made up of Ipieca members, ourselves as consultants, and our committee, rather than just relying on a very traditional consultancy model where the expert was supposed to know all the answers. The heart of the partnership lay in a series of 4 active learning workshops over a 3-year period with 22 different member companies participating. And this forum soon really morphed into what I would call a mind at work, a huge support system, a wise community of practice with lots of trust and honest and deep discussions lots of reaching out among the participants in between the pilot workshops, and a lot of space to hear what other companies were doing. Many of the stories, the kind of powerful examples related to the business case and other points help make the guidance come to life. I think the third piece that was important in crafting this guide was the fact that there was a coherent vision of the members of Ipieca and also of the committee along with us that helped direct us and give us a light of where we were heading. One aim that we had was to create a next generation product that was very hands-on, based on practical experience, intuitive, applicable, and results-oriented, field-based. And the second thing that we tried to do, and I think this was unique in this guidance compared to any others that are out there, was to speak to the challenges of corporate practitioners who are tasked with rolling out a grievance or standard on a corporate level or implementing a standardized approach across the company. So those were a couple of highlights of how this manual came to be. And at this point, to kind of roll up our sleeves and dig deeper into the manual, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Luke, to talk in more detail about the contents of the manual.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. And indeed, it's great to see such an interest in community grievance mechanisms. So on my part, for the next 5-6 minutes, I will run through how we designed the manual and also the first part in terms of the operational framework. So as you can see on the slide, there were basically 3 elements that we really wanted to drive home in the design of the manual. First is that we wanted to produce something that really acknowledged the lessons learned from the practitioners in the field. We work with 7-8 companies. We wanted to really do justice to all the lessons learned and to provide a manual that would allow practitioners to say, okay, I have this document, now I know enough to actually know what steps I should take, provide a reference, have some tools. The second element is the one that Susan just mentioned, that we want to provide some early insight in the corporate colleagues that say, you know, it's nice to know how you develop a grievance mechanism, but how do you actually roll it out company-wide? And there has been previously there was limited information and guidance in that respect. And then the third one was that since the previous most grievances previously were developed prior to the ready principle, the UN guiding principle. And what we wanted to do with this manual is to firmly embed them in the UN guiding principle and specifically in the effectiveness criteria for grievance mechanisms. So you'll see that in the table of contents. 2 other comments. One is that we have had feedback that this is quite a meaty manual. That's for a reason. It was really developed as a modular manual. We didn't intend to have people read from A to Z. We really developed this for people that said, okay, I am interested in the corporate piece or I'm interested in the operational piece. And I can even read these manuals as standalone elements. And then the last point is that we see an introduction relationship between and stakeholder engagement. And that's something that we're quite passionate about, also based on the learning with the pilot companies, because we have seen that standalone grievance mechanisms are doomed to fail if they're not embedded in a broader stakeholder engagement strategy. We've seen companies that develop a very sophisticated grievance mechanism, only to see that that's the only venue they provide for community to get access to the company. And of course, that then runs the risk that we get bogus claims only for because people realize that's the only way to get attention. And of course, that then leads to inefficiency, and in some cases, actually implodes. The grievance mechanism implodes. Next slide, please. So then about the operational framework in terms of how do you develop a grievance mechanism. Let me run through these 3 phases and let me briefly run through them and provide the highlight. First is the planning phase, and it's something that often we don't take seriously enough. It is really about preparing the ground and to establish a solid foundation. what we have learned as a key lesson that it's often you need to go slow initially to go fast. You need to provide that initial, you need to have that the business support, leadership support, you need to be sure that you have a mandate. But the key issue here is also to recognize that every site addresses grievances in an informal way before we actually start formalizing it. And in every company, there are people that are fiercely passionate about addressing issues that they see is their responsibility. And typically, it would be quite critical to acknowledge those people and also to build on the lessons learned. Because if not, of course, there's always a healthy skepticism to say, why do we need to fix something if it isn't broken? And is there a risk that, we become too bureaucratic? So acknowledge that what happens before, make a business case, and then you move to the next phase, to the design phase. Next slide, please.
Luke, sorry to interrupt, but is there any way, are you speaking into a headset?
I'm in my phone now.
Oh, you're just using the phone. Okay,
yeah.
There's quite a lot of feedback on the line. I'm not sure what we can do to fix it, but if there's anything you can think of your end, that would be great.
Okay, I'll see if I can get a bit further away from my computer. Is it better?
That's much better.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
So,
well.
Shall I continue?
Yes, it's better when you're not speaking, but I'm not sure what we can do about that. So let's continue because we can make out what you're saying.
Sorry about that. Okay. So in the design phase, just a few comments, and let me keep it short. In terms of the different phases, and I will pick an example for each phase. Is in the design phase, many companies have said, what do you do with third parties? If you involve them too late, then they accuse you of using them as rubber stamping the procedure. But if you involve them too early, that leads to complications as well. So what we have learned that the involvement of third parties is typically best done once you have your procedure developed and you have your management systems in place, and then you go out to get some external input. But there is a risk of involving these parties too early. The second piece is related to the risk and opportunity assessment, and that's something that companies rarely do. Whereas we've found that it's actually very, very critical, because if you know the type of grievance you expect, the volume, then you can actually anticipate how it will inform the level of resources you require, the level of the type of recourse mechanism, if you need any kind of technical additional expertise. So it informs your mechanisms in significant ways. So please do that risk and opportunity assessment beforehand. Then you develop the procedure, but more importantly is also to think about the management framework. The procedure is often pretty straightforward, and in a toolkit there is a standard procedure, but what many companies underestimate is to think about determining scope in terms of roles and responsibilities. How are you going to name the procedure? Is it a grievance procedure, a complaint procedure, a feedback mechanism? What do you do with training and awareness? And what kind of database system will you use? What kind of assurance system or KPIs will you have? And that is fairly time consuming. Once you've done that, then test. Testing is important because a grievance mechanism is not something that you typically figure out as you go. The moment you say we're open for business, then you have to expect that people will actually use it. And at that time, you need to have tested your systems, your forms, your administrative procedures, your investigation procedure. So you don't want to go live until you know that's all in good shape. And then ultimately, you make sure you implement your report, both internally and externally. Next slide, please. And then at last, the procedure. It's a very straightforward procedure, 7 steps. And again, I won't go into detail. Few highlights. Receive, I think, is pretty straightforward to make sure it's accessible in terms of geography, location, language. But acknowledge is an important one. What we have seen is that if you acknowledge a grievance, either by SMS, by giving a copy of the grievance form, even by phone, people know that a case is heard and that it's being acknowledged by the company. And often that takes away a lot of the initial irritation. Then you assess and assign, and especially with assess, you want to make sure you have a quick fix or a rapid response procedure, because we know that most grievances actually are it can be addressed within 24 to 48 hours. And only when you need the support of communities, support of your internal departments, then you assign it to the department for investigation. The response piece is quite critical as well, because you want to make sure that as a company, you're not seen by communities or by complainants as the instigator, the investigator, and a judge. And therefore, you have to make sure that you don't simply announce what the company is going to do, but that dialogue with the complainant, that's actually quite critical in terms of how successful you will be in, especially bringing a message that is maybe not appreciated, not always understood by the complainant. Then you have a recourse mechanism, and we can go back, we can talk about that later in terms of what do you do if you agree to disagree, and what are the options to involve third parties or to keep it involved in the house. And then last, you follow up and you close out. Closing out being different from resolution. Resolution is you get to an agreement. Resolution and closure is the resolution is actually implemented. And that's basically straightforward, the straightforward steps of the procedure. That's all in theory. So actually to get a reality check, I would actually like to invite Daniel from Kenya to give us a bit of his experience from how do you actually implement this in the field. Daniel, over to you.
Daniel, are you there? Daniel, we still can't hear you if you are talking. Daniel? Daniel?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Now, Taro has been in Kenya for the last 5 years, specifically in Turkana. And during all this time, during the operations, we've had a number of blockages, what we call roadblocks here. And in one particular month, we had around 133 blockages, and this really put forward a business case for a grievance mechanism. And in the development of the mechanism, we used the Ipieca manual, which provided us with ideas and a roadmap. Specifically, we have the diagnostic tool that we continue to use. It also helps us in terms of setting up a system that is fit for purpose and fit to scale. So the manual has been really useful in giving us a roadmap and ideas on how to develop a fit for purpose mechanism. The other experience we've had is in terms of the power of KPIs and reports that are used for decision making. And the reports that we do have clearly provide a lot of information to management, and is a powerful tool that we use to affect decision making. And this has led to reduction in blockages, because the management and decision makers use the reports and the KPIs that we use, that we produce at the end of the month or as need be. And this has been really good in terms of use to reduce blockages to decision making. The other experience we've had is the fact that most of the grievances are related to contractor behavior. Some of the grievances are related to contractors not following policy, contractors not keeping to their promises or keeping their promises, and this normally causes work stoppages. So one thing that we need to do, and that should be done, is to make sure that grievance management is put into contract, so that contractors know from the first day that they'll be held accountable, and they need to be aware of the grievance mechanism and the procedure and what is expected of them as contractors. So it is very important that when you're developing a grievance mechanism or putting one in place, you think of how do we put contract clauses or clauses on grievance management into contracts, so that then contractors are held liable. We've had almost all our grievances are 60% related to contractor behavior, so that puts forward a case to ensure that grievance mechanism is in contractors contracts and contract clauses. The other experience we've had is the fact that senior management should really have support for the mechanism. If it is not supported from the top by the managers or senior management of the business, then really it is very difficult to get traction for it in the field or in the company. So what we've done and what has been really helpful is the fact that in the field, the person that chairs the field grievance committee is actually the top person in the field, which is the field operations manager. This has been very helpful in terms of making sure that contractors and contract holders or functional heads are held to account, because the senior most person in the field follows up and makes sure that grievances are followed up appropriately through the functional heads, which has been very helpful. So if you're trying to put up or start a mechanism, you must make sure that the field topmost person or the company's topmost people support the mechanism. Again, in terms of lessons on implementation, it's very important to make sure that grievances are resolved promptly and in good time. And this is because if a grievance is resolved in good time, then it serves as a marketing tool that you can use to publicize the grievance mechanism. A happy complainant or a happy community member is a better publicity for the mechanism than anything else that you might have. Again, in another experience that we have is the fact that we need to continuously highlight repeat grievances, because this normally shows failure of the company to learn from its past mistakes or failure to follow policy. So we need to really highlight some of these repeat grievances. It's also important that in a place like Turkana, which has been marginalized for a long time, and the government is less, or the policing is very low, you need to rely on community structures, traditional structures, elders, and the people in the community to resolve grievances, so that then at the end of the day, you build trust in the system, and also you have grievances that are resolved on a win-win basis for the community and for the company. And if you use elders, then you're able to really get good resolutions to grievances. Again, it's also important to adapt your reports to highlight emerging issues, because if you look at it, has the system worked for us in the field? Yes, it has, but we need to continuously adapt our reports to highlight emerging issues. And some of these emerging issues are the ones that we use in our engagement. It's good for our social performance team. It's good for our engagement, stakeholder engagement team, to continuously be appraised on what are the emerging issues which are used for decision making, and also to inform our engagement going forward with the committee. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Daniel. That was great. So now handing back over to Susan, who I hope is there.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to make a shift here from looking at grievance mechanisms at the operational level to focusing for those from the corporate office who are tasked with getting a grievance mechanism rolled out company-wide. This piece is for you. And if you look into the manual, modules 4, 5, and 6 are those that are dedicated to the work of the corporate office that has to roll these mechanisms out across its operations. I might start by saying that getting started, which is the first step, and this framework that we have set out on the slide looks so linear and organized and step by step, but we've discovered that in implementing it, it is messy and much more iterative than it looks on the slide, and it can take quite a while to go all the way from getting started to the last stage, which is scaling up. But getting started, I think a question people often have is, how do corporate-wide initiatives get started? In our experience, there are a couple of ways that can happen. Sometimes a directive will come from the top down. The board or the corporate executive team might task someone at the corporate level, a CSR manager, to put out or roll out grievance mechanisms across the operation. I think one of our early lessons is that if you are given a directive but nothing more substantial, you have to take that directive and try to establish it into a stronger mandate that actually takes the form of a policy or a standard so that it is a requirement. So one way that initiatives get started is from the top down. In addition, there are often CSR managers who look for opportunities to begin to put in place a corporate-wide grievance mechanism system. And they do this in a number of ways, looking for change initiatives at the top that they can almost ride the coattails of. Is there a company improvement initiative that they can jump into? Or is there a higher level business goal where a grievance mechanism system could really support and help promote that? So they are opportunistic and looking for opportunities to jump onto a bigger change initiative that is supported at the top. I think a third avenue is through building on external forces such as lender requirements, most of which say that for projects of a certain risk that grievance mechanisms have to be put in place. If there is an international NGO campaign or a shareholder initiative or a risk assessment, this is another vehicle that you might use in order to put forward a company-wide grievance mechanism system. One of the other learnings that we've had, which probably will not be a big surprise to people, is that in rolling out this grievance mechanism and in going through the steps of the pathway, you are going to encounter resistance just because much of this is like leading a change initiative. So in the early stages of getting ready to do this, getting started and assessing the risks and opportunities, a lot of that work is preparing yourself, establishing your mandate, looking for champions that have power in the organization who will be supportive and make the business case. I think building a coalition that is across the company, so it's not just social performance or CSR people, it's broader than that. Really learning enough about grievance mechanisms that you feel confident that you can make a business case, and you don't have to be an expert, but you have to understand enough about it to be able to promote it and to build a coalition in support of it. Once you have gotten your mandate, deepened your own expertise, it's helpful to get a sense of what sites are doing. Are many of the sites, do they have something that is formal up and running, and how does it match up with some of the key international standards? Or are there a lot of systems in place, but they're much more ad hoc and informal, and what you're trying to do is update and strengthen those? So getting some sense across your company of what the status and state of grievance mechanisms is will help you in your rollout. A third point that we found to be really useful is step 3, which is to launch a pilot program in order to learn and in order to then inform both the guidances and training as well as policies and procedures at the corporate level that the corporate might be responsible for. Some of our pilots people also pointed out that when you develop a pilot across your company or several of them, this can be very resource intensive. So it is an optional step and something that's not appropriate for all companies. However, I think our team would really promote the idea of deep and meaningful internal consultation at the very least if you can't launch pilot programs to inform both your requirement at the corporate level and also the various elements of the management framework, which I'm going to talk about in a minute as of right now. So Helen, if you could go to the corporate management framework slide, and then we'll go back to the pathway to sum up on the last step. So now looking at developing the management framework, this is about putting a corporate policy or standard in place. It's about then putting together, and this is where feedback from your sites will be very helpful, putting together a template for a standard operating procedure. A lot of our feedback from our committee and our companies during our pilot is that there is so much that corporate can do to really assist and promote and support sites in getting their grievance mechanisms up and running effectively. And without corporate's assistance, it's much tougher and tends not to happen. One of the things that is helpful is to have templates in place, such as one for a standard operating procedure. A third point is that grievance mechanisms take resources. They take human resources. It is not necessary for all sites to have a full-time grievance officer and a big team. It really depends on the context and on the complaint environment and on risks and matters like this. Nevertheless, it's important, I think, to put in your requirement that a corporate or a manager at the site level, whoever the highest level manager would be, an operational manager, is responsible for providing the human resources, the staffing to allow people to really be able to set themselves up for success and implement and design and implement a grievance mechanism. Another place where corporate can be very helpful in terms of the management framework is developing training, guidance, tools, and resources so that sites have something to fall back upon and aren't floundering on their own without any kind of guidance or tools. And we hope that some of what is contained in the manual, in the Ipieca manual, will help serve that purpose as well. Another element of the framework that's important to think about up front and to let sites know about is how learning and assurance is to take place. Some of the experience that we had in terms of implementing a grievance mechanism across the company was that until the company gave a deadline as to when the mechanisms needed to be up and running and actually put in place and let people know about the auditing process that was going to be following rapidly once the deadline passed, that people tended to keep these grievance mechanisms on their back burner, but that it was very incentivizing to know that there is a deadline by which they had to be up and running, and that at the same time there was going to be some kind of a review or audit process in place. This last piece of the corporate framework, the culture and commitment, is a tougher, longer term, I think, piece that has to do with the change initiative. And that is really trying to get the senior leadership on board to be champions and understand the business case and step up when a social performance manager needs them to help begin to make a shift so that grievance management and prevention becomes everybody's business rather than just the fire department of social performance. So those are a few of the points and kind of the steps in thinking about what does a corporate framework look like and what do you need to consider as you develop it. Once you have that in place, and it should be really informed by the field in order to build buy-in, make a quality framework, and minimize resistance, the last piece is scaling up, is really getting company-wide full compliance with that, including thinking about monitoring and what internal performance, internal reporting is going to look like, so people are prepared at the sites to be able to collect that kind of information and put together those kinds of reports. The final piece on really getting a rollout, getting a grievance mechanism rolled out across an operation goes to the next, not the next slide, but slide number, I think it's number 11, which is the corporate framework supporting project operations. And this is the idea that corporate people need to roll up their sleeves and get out to the field where they can to provide whatever level of support that is tailored to site needs. They need to offer some incentives. They need to think about how to create learning across sites. They need to help with considering what the KPIs are and assist with data management processes so that sites have a way of thinking about collecting information. We can talk more about this later. This whole idea of data management is a big issue to consider, whether or not you use an Excel spreadsheet or buy some kind of a software program or build onto what already exists in terms of data management systems in your site. And then finally, to furnish guidance on escalating grievances. And this is also, I think, an issue that we're discussing in the industry, which is there a role for corporate in resolving cases? Are there some cases that ultimately go up the chain of command to the corporate offices, or alternatively, are those all resolved and dealt with in the field? And that's something to think about early on in the design of your mechanism about the role of corporate. Some of our learnings in terms of the support for advancing grievance mechanisms on the ground is the importance of having a person that people out in the field can call to get a second opinion about whether or not their grievance mechanism is good enough and whether or not it is, in fact, meeting the standards of corporate and the international standards. Alternatively, I think people are looking for sometimes very specific learnings from other sites to apply in their sites. And sometimes corporate can be helpful in putting together kind of peer assistance where sites are struggling with similar challenges and perhaps some are further along in the grievance mechanisms development, helping to link those people together so that one can help the other. I think another incentive that a few sites have done is tied performance evaluations and bonuses to getting a grievance mechanism up and running and meeting certain targets. So that's another type of assistance that or incentive that can be developed. I think as well, sometimes the field needs corporate to help them make the business case and to really get management on board. So I'll stop there because I think what we've learned also in this experience is that the voices of Ipieca members are much more powerful than the voices of the consultants. And I know that Gabriella from Hess Corporation has worked significantly on all of these issues, both at the corporate level and in the field, and she's going to now give an example of rollout from a corporate perspective.
Thank you so much, Susan. And these next comments are really just to support these latter modules in the manual that Susan has just gone through for us, the importance of the role of the headquarters corporate in working to implement a global standard. So at Hess, we found the participation in the Ipieca pilot to be extremely valuable for us, and in particular, the most recent publication, the manual, that we're going through today to be particularly informative and practical for use not only at the field level for implementation, but also at the corporate level as we work to build out our governance. So like many companies at Hess, we have a hierarchy of governance beginning with our values and our code of conduct. The next level down are our policies. We have corporate social responsibility and human rights policies. The next level down in the hierarchy is global standards, which kind of which further articulate and set out expectations to operationalize the higher level values that are articulated in our policies. So at Hess, we've been working to develop both a CSR global standard and a human rights global standard, and we found a lot of value in being able to reference the manual in terms of informing the section and language that we've developed internally for our own global standard that applies to all of our operations. So that's been really valuable. Certainly the manual also has been shared across the enterprise via our intranet. It's posted on our corporate social responsibility intranet under stakeholder engagement.
and is a resource that's been made available and is valuable for internal practitioners as well. We also at HES spent a great deal of time thinking through, once we launched a grievance mechanism, how were we going to capture the data? We did a lot of benchmarking, both within oil and gas and within mining, to understand what our peers were using. And as Susan has mentioned, you know, it can range from Excel sheets to sophisticated databases. It just needs to be what works for your own company. At HES, we took the route of building our own database to manage stakeholder engagement, and it also has a module within it on grievance management, and the manual served, I'm just flipping back to reference the right slide here, the manual and the process, the procedure, the operational framework, which was on slide 10 that Luke went through, very much informed the requirements we gave to our IT department in order to be able to develop the different components within the database to cover what we needed to cover in order to manage grievances effectively. So our database has all of the elements for us to be able to receive, acknowledge, assess and assign, investigate, respond, recourse or appeal, and then the follow-up and closeout. And so those are just a few examples from our experience on how we've used the module to, the manual to inform our overall governance frameworks for grievance mechanism implementation. So back over to you, Susan. Thank you.
Very briefly, because I know we want to get to the questions and answers and we still have lessons learned, I would just like to reference that at the end of the manual there are 15 different tools, some of which relate to operational grievance mechanisms at the site level and some which relate to the rollout at the corporate level. These tools are referenced in particular places throughout the manual, and they include things like job descriptions for a grievance officer, what exactly the UN guiding principles mean, the effectiveness criteria mean, and tips for how to undertake those. There's a complaint risk assessment tool and a variety of other, I think, very practical, very helpful templates and so forth for use and practical application. Over to you, Gabriella, to talk about the lessons.
Gabriella, we can't hear you. You might be on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So we're on slide 17. This is the second to last slide. On the overall lessons that Ipieca in our Social Responsibility Working Group has been able to learn by taking a look at the 7 pilots and the learnings and rolling them up into the aggregate. And I can say it's been a real pleasure to be part of this work, and we feel that a lot of these lessons also are not limited to oil and gas. Really, I think companies in a variety of industries who are working to implement RUGI and the access to remedy and company-led grievance mechanisms, there's a lot that I think overlaps for other industries as well in terms of these lessons. So first off, number 1, launch the mechanism at the most favorable time for the community and the company. It's critical to design a fit-for-purpose mechanism. In doing so, you're going to want to engage with a broad range of internal and external stakeholders so that as a company, you're sure that you're launching the mechanism at a time when you know that you're prepared to actually deliver and implement and have the resources to be consistent and predictable, and for the community that you've engaged with them and they are on board and understand and are ready for participating in the grievance mechanism as well. Number 2, base the mechanisms on risks and local circumstances. The point here again is just that not one size fits all. So really, these grievance mechanisms need to be site-specific and tailored to what works for that particular community. Even within a geography like the United States, for example, you know, what works in one community in one state may not be appropriate in another community in another state. So it really does have to be fit for purpose. Number 3, address grievances in a timely manner to prevent escalation. The great benefit, I think, that we found in grievance mechanisms is that they really do provide kind of early points of light. It's an early warning signal for companies. It's early feedback. It's pre-incident. The opportunity cost only gets more expensive if you delay addressing, engaging, responding, and finding a way to resolve the grievances in a timely manner. So there's a lot of value in the data you can collect in terms of the feedback that you're getting from the communities that can help you as a company address that sooner than later so that you reduce operational delays. Number 4, contractors need to be in conformance with the process. Daniel, in his example from Tullow in Kenya earlier today in this call, mentioned that as well. Anybody operating on behalf of the company is going to reflect back on the reputation of the company, and so they need to be part of the grievance mechanism process and in conformance with it as well. Number 5, management buy-in is needed at both the site level and the corporate level. Helen just spoke about, you know, the pros and cons of grievance mechanisms that are imposed upon via headquarters. At the same time, there is great value in the consistent approach that an enterprise-wide approach could take, but at the end of the day, implementation isn't going to happen from headquarters. These are site-specific grievance mechanisms, community-specific, and so that local management buy-in is just critical. Number 6, analyze and measure success of the grievance mechanism. You really need to be measuring some folks might think, oh, well, if I have 0 grievances, then, you know, it's really effective and I'm doing great in the community. 0 grievances is not necessarily a good sign. It may be an indication that there's not trust or understanding from the local community of the grievance mechanism's existence or purpose. So you need to have the right measurements in place to analyze the success and measure the success. Number 7, the corporate function plays an important role in the development, implementation, and maintenance of a grievance mechanism. And we've spoken a bit about opportunities for corporate level governance to help ensure consistency and enable measurement across the enterprise. Number 8, clearly define a grievance and distinguish it from other types of complaints from the community. Here really, especially with the interface with the environment, health, and safety functions in companies and their categorization of high potential risks, they have a whole methodology in the risk management space that could cross over if you don't have clear definitions between what's a high potential, what's a grievance, and you want to be able to do a mapping of your existing complaints processes in order to ensure clarity with what should go through and be accepted by the grievance mechanism and what is better addressed by other corporate processes. Number 9, ensure that there is an adequate grievance management system. So again, whether or not it's a spreadsheet or an Excel or even a complex database, you need to ensure that at each location there's an appropriate and adequate management system in order to be able to track to make sure that you're actually following through with the procedure that you've committed to the community that you're going to follow. And finally, number 10, establishing a grievance mechanism requires time and resources. It's critical to do a mapping of existing systems, seek to integrate your grievance mechanism within other business processes and existing systems so that it's not viewed by operations as a bolt-on, but rather really integrated into broader corporate processes. And that's going to take time, and sometimes it's going to take resources, like maybe building onto an existing database in order to develop your own grievance mechanism database. So that all does take time and resources, but presents a great benefit as well. I think a final point I'd just like to make is that resolving grievances at the end of the day is really about maintaining relationships, and it's not about seeking a win at all costs. Grievance mechanisms are relationship-building tools that are designed to build and maintain local confidence between companies and communities to resolve issues, concerns, and complaints. Where a complaint has been reviewed, and even if it's been found to be, you know, out of scope or invalid or not a complaint related to the company, sharing that feedback and detailing the outcomes of those internal investigations that you went through to determine that can really demonstrate a company's responsiveness and respect for local concerns and demonstrate the commitment to building those community relationships.
Great, thanks so much, Gabriella. I've already got a question that's come in via the chat function, and everyone else on the line, if you have questions, please do add them to the chat function, or raise your hand and you can ask it yourself. I'll unmute you. So the first question, I think perhaps you could answer, Gabriella. It's from Erica George. She says, thanks very much for this informative overview of an important contribution to the field. Did the pilot projects provide businesses with any insight into perceptions of the aggrieved concerning the value of the mechanism in addressing, redressing, articulating the alleged grievance?
Hi, and Erica, it's nice to be on the phone or on the webinar with you. The data that comes through in terms of what is the nature of the complaint, the location, what is the theme, et cetera, does provide valuable information to the company in terms of how operations may be creating an impact. And then they also include, at least in the case of Hess, I'm pretty sure with all of the pilots as well, a component at the end of the process where you get feedback, you request feedback from the grievant on were they satisfied with the outcome, and then that might be yes or no. It might not be that the resolution was what the grievant was looking for, but then the second follow-up question is, were you satisfied with the process? Did you feel that the process was fair? Do you have feedback? And in that way, we're able to ascertain, you know, the effectiveness of the grievance mechanism in that way.
Great, thanks, Gabriella. Another question that's come in is, what are some good KPIs to measure the effectiveness of a community grievance mechanism? So I don't know who wants to take that. Perhaps not Luke, because there's terrible feedback from his line.
I'll go ahead and jump in unless somebody else wants to. So I think there are a couple of common requirements, KPIs, that often companies are using at this stage. And they're fairly, I think, common sense. One is the total number of complaints, often by category. And it's useful to show how this has changed over time. As has already been described, if there is a zero, we once had a really great meeting in our action learning workshops about the meaning of zero. That's a red flag. It may mean you are doing a terrific job, or as Gabriella mentioned, it may mean that there is lack of trust in the mechanism, lack of even recognition that one exists, so it's important to dive down underneath these numbers to figure out what they mean. I think many companies are also looking at the level of severity of a complaint. Is it low, medium, or high? Another KPI has to do with the time to resolve a case. Some others look at things like the number of days where activity on site was disrupted as something important in the context. I think a really important KPI has to do with the number of repeat grievances, and one of the powerful elements of a grievance mechanism is the ability to look at trends and repeat patterns, and often that means that there's something systemic that needs to be addressed in perhaps the way the operation is undertaking its social and environmental type work. So number of repeat grievances is useful. Looking at the number and the status of cases that are referred to an independent recourse mechanism or to court are a couple of other items that are often included.
That's great. Thanks so much, Susan. So we're actually past our time, so I think we'll have to stop it there. But thanks so much to everyone for joining today, and of course all our presenters. We've recorded this webinar, and we'll make it available on the Ipieca Vimeo page should you wish to listen again, or share it with any of your colleagues. Please just contact me for the link. My email address is on the system is on the screen right now. And if you have further follow-up questions that we haven't been able to answer today, or proposals for future webinars looking at more specific issues around community grievance mechanisms, then that would be really great to hear as well, and we'd be happy to hold those.